Picture this: a crowded martial arts charity gala in Los Angeles. The room glitters with Hollywood elite championship fighters and martial arts legends. At the center of it all stands Steven Seagal, holding court like a king among peasants, his voice booming across the ballroom as he spins yet another tale of his supposed battlefield heroics. Then, quietly, almost unnoticed, Chucknorris walks through the door. No fanfare, no entourage, just a man in a simple black suit, here to support a cause he believes in. Seagal's eyes lock onto him, and something shifts in the air. A smirk creeps across Seagal's face, that familiar, condescending grin that says he's about to make someone the punchline of his next story. What happens next will send shockwaves through that gilded room, reminding everyone present of truth as old as combat itself. The loudest voice in the room is rarely the most dangerous, and the quietest man, he's the one you should never, ever underestimate. The Ritz-Carlton Ballroom in downtown Los Angeles gleams under crystal chandeliers, each prism casting rainbow fragments across marble floors. Tonight's event, the annual Martial Arts Masters Charity Gala, draws everyone who's anyone in the fighting world. Champions from every discipline, UFC legends, actors who've done their own stunts, trainers who've shaped Olympic gold medalists, and, of course, the celebrities who played martial artists on screen. Steven Seagal arrives fashionably late, as always. He's wearing an all-black ensemble, expensive tailored, with that signature ponytail hanging down his back. At 71, he still carries himself with the swagger of someone who believes his own mythology. His entourage trails behind him, a personal assistant, a bodyguard who looks bored, and a filmmaker who's supposedly documenting his legacy. Seagal makes his entrance like a peacock spreading its feathers. He stops at every cluster of people, inserting himself into conversations, name-dropping his supposed connections to the CIA, his training with Navy SEALs, his secret missions in Southeast Asia. The stories grow more elaborate with each retelling. The thing people don't understand about real combat, he announces to a circle of younger fighters, his voice loud enough to carry across half the room, is that it's not about these sport techniques. What I've done, what I've seen, in actual warfare situations, it changes you. These tournament guys, they wouldn't last 5 minutes in the environments I've operated in. Some listeners nod politely. Others exchange glances. Everyone here knows Seagal's reputation for exaggeration, but he's still a name, still commands a certain presence. So they tolerate it. They smile. They laugh at his jokes. They don't challenge him. The evening flows with champagne and small talk. The charity, focused on providing martial arts training to underprivileged youth, will raise over $1 million tonight. It's a good cause, and everyone present has contributed in some way. Then, at 8:47 p.m., Chucknorris walks through the main entrance. There's no announcement, no spotlight. He's not on the guest list as a speaker or honoree. He simply arrives, having heard about the charity event through his network and wanted to support it. He's dressed in a modest black suit, his distinctive beard now fully silver, his eyes still carrying that calm, focused intensity that made him a champion decades ago. Chuck is 85 now, but he moves with the quiet grace of someone who's never stopped training. He doesn't seek attention. In fact, he tries to avoid it, making his way toward the registration table to make a donation, hoping to slip in and out without fanfare. But Steven Seagal notices him immediately. Seagal's eyes narrow, then widen with something that looks like opportunity. He's in the middle of another story, this one about allegedly training Anderson Silva personally, when he spots Chuck across the room. His sentence trails off mid-word. Well, Seagal says loud enough for his entire circle to hear. Look who decided to show up. The people around him turn to follow his gaze. Chuck is at the registration desk, quietly speaking with a volunteer, writing a check. He hasn't noticed Seagal yet, or if he has, he's choosing not to acknowledge him. This, apparently, irritates Seagal even more. You know, Seagal continues, his voice rising, it's interesting what they call legends these days. He laughs, a sharp, dismissive sound. Several people in his circle look uncomfortable. They know what's coming. Seagal begins walking toward Chuck, and his entourage follows like remoras trailing a shark. The filmmaker raises his camera. The conversation volume in the room, begins to drop as people sense something happening. Chuck finishes his conversation with a volunteer, receives his donation receipt with a gracious nod, and turns to find Steven Seagal standing about 15 feet away, arms crossed, that smirk firmly in place. Chucknorris, Seagal announces, as if introducing him to the room. The man, the myth, the movie star. The way he says movie star drips with condescension. It's a calculated insult, implying that Chuck's reputation is all Hollywood fiction, nothing real behind it. Chuck meets his eyes with that same calm expression. Steven, he says simply with a slight nod. Nothing more. He's not taking the bait. But Seagal isn't done. Not even close. I was just telling these folks about the difference between real martial arts and what Hollywood sells to make money. He gestures broadly at the crowd that's now forming, drawn by the tension like moss to flame. You know, the difference between actual combat experience and, well, choreographed fight scenes. A few nervous laughs ripple through the crowd. Chuck's expression doesn't change. His hands rest calmly at his sides. He's been in this situation before, not with Seagal specifically, but with loud, insecure men who need to prove something they haven't earned. We've all made movies, Steven. Chuck says quietly, that's not what defines us. Ah, but see, that's where you're wrong. Seagal takes a step closer, his voice growing louder. Some of us have done more than movies. Some of us have real experience, real training, real credentials. Another step, and some of us just kick people on camera and let the stunt coordinators do the rest. The room has gone almost completely silent now. Even the waiters have stopped moving. Everyone is watching this unfold, this bizarre confrontation between two men who should be too old for this kind of posturing. But Chucknorris doesn't rise to the provocation. Instead, something subtle shifts in his eyes, a kind of patient sadness, like he's watching a child throw a tantrum. If you say so, Steven, Chuck says softly. He starts to turn away, intending to end this embarrassing display before it goes any further. That's when Seagal laughs. Not a chuckle, a full mocking laugh that echoes across the marble and crystal of the ballroom. That's what I thought. Seagal says triumphantly, playing his audience now. Walk away. That's always been your style, hasn't it? Avoid real confrontation. Stick to the scripts. Chuck stops. His shoulders tense almost imperceptibly. For just a moment, something flickers across his face. Not anger exactly, but a decision being made. Chucknorris turns back around. Slowly. When he speaks, his voice is still quiet, but now there's steel underneath it. Steven, I didn't come here for this. I came to support kids who need help. If you have something you need to prove, this isn't the time or place. Oh, I don't need to prove anything. Seagal shoots back. My record speaks for itself. My training speaks for itself. My experience speaks for itself. He spreads his arms wide, performing for the crowd. But you're living off a reputation built on myths. Chucknorris facts. Internet jokes. That's your legacy, being a punchline. The crowd gasps. Several people look away, embarrassed for both men. This has gone too far, and everyone knows it. Chuck's jaw tightens. His hands, still at his sides, curl slightly into fists, not from aggression, but from the effort of maintaining control. Because here's what Steven Seagal doesn't know, what he's never bothered to learn. Chucknorris could have responded to those words with violence. He could have put Seagal on the ground in seconds. But Chuck stopped being the man who needed to prove himself through fighting decades ago. Steven, Chuck says, and his voice carries a weight that makes Seagal's bluster seem hollow by comparison. I'm going to walk away now. Not because I'm afraid of you. Not because you've intimidated me. But because a real martial artist knows when fighting is necessary and when it's just ego. I hope someday you learn the difference. He turns again. And again, Seagal can't let it go. That's right, run away. Seagal calls after him, just like you ran from every real challenge in your career. He laughs again, louder this time. You know what the difference between us is, Chuck? I'm a real martial artist. You're just an actor who learned some moves. Chuck stops at the ballroom entrance. His hand is on the door. For a long moment, he stands there, and everyone in that room holds their breath, waiting to see what he'll do. Then Chuck does something unexpected. He lets go of the door. He walks back toward Seagal, but not with anger or aggression. He walks with purpose, with certainty, with the quiet confidence of a man who knows exactly who he is and what he's capable of. He stops about 10 feet from Seagal. The crowd parts to give them space. You could hear a pin drop. "You want to know the difference between us?" Chuck asks, his voice still quiet, but now carrying to every corner of the room. "The real difference?" Seagal crosses his arms, that smirk still in place. "Enlighten me." "The difference," Chuck begins, "is that I have nothing to prove. Not to you, not to anyone here, not to myself. I proved what I needed to prove a long time ago. Stephen. And I proved it in places where it actually mattered." Chuck's eyes grow distant for just a moment, and in that moment, he's not in this ballroom anymore. He's back in 1968, in the middle of the Vietnam War, serving as an air policeman at Osan Air Base in South Korea. He's remembering the real violence he witnessed, the friends he lost, the fear and chaos of actual combat. Not the choreographed kind, but the kind that leaves you changed forever. He's remembering 1969, when he returned home and channeled all that pain and discipline into competitive karate. He's remembering winning championship after championship, not for glory or ego, but to prove to himself that he could transform trauma into mastery. 6-time undefeated world professional middleweight karate champion. That wasn't a Hollywood title. That was earned in blood, sweat, and countless hours in dojos where the only audience was other fighters trying to take your head off. He's remembering opening his own dojos and teaching students who genuinely wanted to learn, not to become famous, but to become better versions of themselves. He's remembering Steve McQueen, his student and friend, who convinced him to try acting, not because Chuck sought fame, but because McQueen saw something in him that would inspire others. He's remembering every young person he's mentored over the decades, every charity he supported quietly, without press releases or cameras. Every time he chose humility over ego. And then he's back in this ballroom, looking at Steven Seagal, and he feels something close to pity. "I fought professionally when you were still in high school, Stephen." Chuck continues. "I won world championships in actual competition, not demonstration matches. I served my country in uniform during wartime. And when I went to Hollywood, I never forgot where I came from or what really matters. The movies were never meant to prove I was tough. They were meant to tell stories that might inspire people to be better, to stand up for what's right, to protect those who can't protect themselves." Seagal's smirk is wavering now. People in the crowd are nodding. The energy has shifted. "You talk about real martial arts," Chuck says, "but real martial arts isn't about boasting. It's not about intimidation. It's not about tearing others down to make yourself feel bigger. Real martial arts is discipline, respect, humility, knowing that the strongest fighter in a room is often the one who never needs to tell you about it." The room is completely still. Even Seagal's filmmaker has lowered his camera. "So here's what I'm going to do," Chuck says, his voice softening. "I'm going to walk out of here with my dignity intact. I'm going to make my donation to these kids who need positive role models. And I'm going to let you decide what kind of man you want to be remembered as, the one who needed to prove he was tough at a charity event, or the one who understood that real strength is measured in the lives you improve, not the people you put down." Chuck turns one final time toward the door. And this time, the room is so silent that his footsteps echo like thunder on the marble floor. Steven Seagal stands frozen. His mouth is open, but no words come out. The smirk has completely vanished, replaced by something that looks almost like panic. Because, for the first time in years, maybe decades, he's been confronted with the truth about himself, and it's been delivered not with fists or threats, but with something far more devastating. Genuine dignity. The crowd isn't looking at Chuck anymore. They're looking at Seagal, and their expressions have changed. The polite tolerance is gone. In its place is disappointment, embarrassment, judgment. A voice breaks the silence. It comes from near the back of the crowd. An older gentleman in a military dress uniform, medals covering his chest. "Mr. Seagal," the man says, his voice carrying the authority of someone who's commanded troops in actual combat, "I think you owe Mr. Norris an apology. Another voice joins in, this one belonging to a woman in her 60s wearing a dojo patch on her jacket lapel. Chucknorris has done more for martial arts education than anyone I know. He's helped hundreds of kids in my community. What you just did was disgraceful. More voices now, building like a wave, not aggressive, but firm. People who've been taught by Chuck, or whose students were taught by Chuck. People who know his real record, his real character. People who've had enough of bullies, even famous ones. I trained with Chuck in the 70s, says a man who must be in the 70s himself, his voice steady and clear. He could have hurt me badly 100 times over. Instead, he taught me control. Discipline. He made me a better man. That's a real master. Seagal looks around the room, and for the first time, maybe the first time in years, he sees himself as others see him. Not as a legendary warrior he pretends to be, but as an insecure man who spent decades building a house of cards and calling it a fortress. His bodyguard looks uncomfortable. His assistant has taken a step back. His filmmaker's camera hangs uselessly at his side. Then something unexpected happens. A young man, maybe 19 or 20, wearing a volunteer badge to charity, steps forward. He's nervous. You can see in the way his hands shake slightly, but he's determined. Mr. Seagal, the young man says, I grew up watching your movies. I thought you were the coolest. But my sensei, he always told me that the best fighter is the one who prevents the fight. You just proved him right, and it wasn't you who did it. The young man turns and looks at the door where Chuck exited. That's who I want to be like, he says simply, and with that, the spell breaks completely. People begin turning away from Seagal. Conversations resume, but they're different now. There's an energy in the room. Not celebration exactly, but a collective sense that something important just happened. A line was drawn between ego and integrity, and everyone saw which side they wanted to be on. Seagal stands alone in his circle of space, abandoned by his audience, his carefully constructed image crumbling around him like a sandcastle at high tide. And that's when he makes his decision. Steven Seagal walks toward the ballroom exit, not in the direction Chuck went, but toward a side door that leads to a corridor. His entourage scrambles to follow him, confused, asking what he wants to do next. He waves them off without speaking. In the corridor, away from the crowd, Seagal leans against the wall. He closes his eyes. His chest rises and falls with deep, measured breaths. For just a moment, the persona drops completely, and what remains is simply an old man confronting uncomfortable truths. He spent so many years building this image, the undefeatable warrior, the man of mystery, the legend. He believed it so completely that he forgot what was real and what was fabrication. And tonight, in front of hundreds of people, the difference became undeniable. Chucknorris didn't beat him with technique, didn't beat him with strength. He beat him with something Seagal had lost somewhere along the way: authenticity. The corridor door opens. Seagal expects his assistant or his bodyguard. Instead, the military officer from earlier steps through. He looks at Seagal with an expression that's surprisingly gentle. I know what you're feeling, the officer says. Shame, anger at yourself, the desire to run and never look back. He steps closer. I felt that way after my first command failure in Iraq. Lost 3 men because I made a prideful decision. Took me years to forgive myself. But I learned something. Being wrong doesn't make you weak. Admitting it does the opposite. It makes you stronger than you've ever been. Seagal opens his eyes. I don't know how to fix this, he admits, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, you do, the officer says. You fix it the same way you fix any mistake. You acknowledge it. You apologize. And then you do better. The officer walks away, leaving Seagal alone with his thoughts. 10 minutes later, Steven Seagal walks back into ballroom. The event has continued without him. People are mingling, laughing, bidding on silent auction items. The host is about to make announcements from the stage. Seagal walks directly to the microphone, approaches the host, and whispers something. The host looks surprised but nods and steps aside. Excuse me, Seagal says into the microphone, his voice uncertain, lacking all the bravado from earlier. If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment. The room quiets. People turn to look, expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. I need to say something, Seagal continues. Earlier tonight, I disrespected someone who deserves nothing but honor. Chucknorris isn't here to hear this, but I need to say it anyway. I was wrong. I was insecure. And I acted like a bully because that was easier than admitting that I've spent years trying to be something I'm not. You could hear a pin drop. This is not the Steven Seagal anyone expected. Chucknorris is a real champion, a real warrior, a real man. And what he showed me tonight, showing restraint when he could have embarrassed me, showing dignity when I showed none, that's more impressive than any fight choreography or tough guy act I've ever put on. His voice cracks slightly. I don't know if he'll ever see this or hear about it, but I want everyone here to know I was wrong, and I'm sorry, to him, and to everyone who had to witness that. Seagal steps away from the microphone. For a moment, there's silence. Then someone begins to clap. Then another. Then more. It's not thunderous applause. This isn't a victory celebration. It's acknowledgement, respect for the courage it took to admit fault publicly. 3 weeks later, a video circulates online. Someone recorded Seagal's apology, and it's been viewed millions of times. The comments are surprisingly supportive. People recognize genuine remorse. They respect growth, even from unlikely sources. But more importantly, a letter arrives at Chuck Norris's office. It's handwritten, not typed, 3 pages long. Steven Seagal's signature at the bottom. In the letter, Seagal apologizes again, more deeply, more personally. He doesn't make excuses. He simply acknowledges his behavior, his years of ego-driven delusion, and his desire to change. He asks nothing of Chuck, no forgiveness, no public reconciliation. He simply says thank you for the lesson. Chuck reads it twice. Then he picks up his phone and makes a call. 20 minutes later, Steven Seagal answers an unknown number, cautious, uncertain. Steven, Chuck's voice comes through, warm and without malice. I got your letter. Mr. Norris, call me Chuck, and I accept your apology. More than that, I respect it. Do you know how rare it is for someone to actually change? To recognize their own ego and choose humility instead? Seagal's voice is quiet. I don't know if I've changed yet, but I'm trying. That's all any of us can do, Chuck says. Listen, I'm teaching a seminar next month at my ranch. Teaching kids mostly, but also training instructors on how to help troubled youth. If you're interested, I'd like you to come. Not as a guest instructor, as a student. I think you might find it valuable. There's a long pause. Then, I'd be honored. Good. I'll send you the details. And Steven, thank you for your letter. That took courage. After they hang up, Chuck sits in his office, looking out at the Texas landscape beyond his window. He thinks about the ballroom, about Seagal's desperate need for validation, about how easy it would have been to fight, to prove his point with action instead of words. But he chose differently. Because somewhere along the way, Chuck Norris learned that the strongest fighters are the ones who know when not to fight. The most dangerous warriors are often the quietest ones. And the greatest victory isn't defeating your opponent. It's helping them become better than they were. 6 months pass. Steven Seagal attends a seminar at Chuck's ranch, and then another and another. He doesn't publicize it. He doesn't post about it on social media. He simply shows up, trains, listens, and learns. The young students there don't know who he is at first, just another older gentleman trying to better himself. When they eventually find out, they're surprised by his humility, his willingness to admit when he doesn't know something, his genuine interest in helping rather than being the center of attention. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging session, Chuck and Steven sit on the ranch porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and purple. They're both tired, both sweating, both feeling the good ache that comes from honest work. You know what's funny? Seagal says, breaking the comfortable silence, I spent 40 years trying to convince everyone I was the toughest guy in the room, and I was miserable. Now I'm spending my time admitting I have things to learn, and I feel more at peace than I have in decades. Chuck nods slowly. That's because you're finally being honest. With yourself, with others. There's freedom in that. I wasted so much time, Seagal says quietly, You didn't waste it, Chuck corrects him gently. You spent it learning a lesson that some people never learn at all. Better late than never, Stephen. Better late than never. They sit in silence again, two old warriors watching the day end, both understanding now what real strength looks like, and knowing that the battle worth fighting isn't against others, but against the ego that prevents us from becoming who we're truly meant to be. The truth about strength isn't found in how hard you can hit, but in how much grace you show when you have every right to strike back. The real martial arts master isn't the one who never loses a fight. It's the one who never needs to prove they could win one. And the most powerful weapon any warrior possesses isn't speed or technique or physical ability. It's the wisdom to know that walking away with dignity defeats ego every single time. Because at the end of the day, the man who understands this truth doesn't need to be the loudest voice in the room. His silence speaks volumes. His restraint demonstrates mastery. And his choice to build others up instead of tearing them down, that's what separates a martial artist from someone who just knows how to fight. Real legends don't need to announce themselves. They don't need to diminish others to feel elevated. They carry their accomplishments quietly, with their humility like armor, and understand that the greatest victory is not in defeating an enemy, but in turning them into an ally. The strongest lesson anyone can learn is this. Your reputation isn't built by what you say about yourself, but by how you treat others when no one's watching, when there's nothing to gain, when kindness costs you pride. Remember, true power protects, true strength uplifts, and true warriors, they have nothing left to prove, because they already proved it to the only person who matters, themselves.